Okay, I'm picking up on page 254 in the paperback book, and O'Brien just went on this really long rant about the mistakes that other empires have made in the past when they were trying to torture people and get rid of heretics, which are people who are like committing crimes against the government. And he says that really the big problem with the first one, like in the Middle Ages, is that the people who were persecuted were executed publicly, and so they immediately became martyrs. People were like, oh my gosh, this person, I look up to them so much. They never let down their faith, even in the face of fear and death. And so they were held to a really high esteem by the people, which was the first mistake. And then he talks about the Nazi Germany and the communists, and he says that their mistake was they beat them down and the prisoners, and then they made them confess these things that were obviously untrue, and that was their mistake, because even later the people who were killed still became martyrs. And then he says the party doesn't make those mistakes. The party makes sure that the confessions that you make are true because we make them true, right? Because they control the past, essentially. So they control whatever the people confess, and so they're like, we don't make those mistakes. Everything you say is true, and the confessions are real. And then he says, and then he threatens Winston and says that Winston is never gonna. You must stop imagining that posterity will vindicate you. Posterity meaning like the future, your children, and because Winston has been saying for the longest time, if there's hope, it lies in the proles, it lies in the future generations. And here O'Brien is saying, you have to stop believing that, because that's not true. It's not going to happen. You are going to completely be annihilated from everyone's memory, from existence. You will have never existed when we're done with you. And so Winston says, well, then why bother? That seems like a lot of work if you're just going to remove me from history. So that's where we're going to pick up. You are thinking, he said, that's O'Brien, that since we intend to destroy you utterly so that nothing that you say or do can make the smallest difference, in that case, why do we go to the trouble of interrogating you first? That is what you're thinking, was it not? Yes, said Winston. O'Brien smiled slightly. You are a flaw in the pattern, Winston. You are a stain that must be wiped out. Did I not tell you just now that we are different from the persecutors of the past? We are not content with negative obedience, nor even with the most abject submission. When finally you surrender to us, it must be of your own free will. We do not destroy the heretic because he resists us. So long as he resists us, we never destroy him. We convert him. We capture his inner mind. We reshape him. We burn all evil and all illusion out of him. We bring him over to our side, not in appearance, but genuinely, heart and soul. We make him one of ourselves before we kill him. It is intolerable to us that even an erroneous thought should exist anywhere in the world, however secret and powerless it may be. Even in the instant of death, we cannot permit any deviation. In the old days, the heretic walked at the stake still a heretic, proclaiming his heresy, exulting in it. Even the victim of the Russian purges could carry a rebellion locked up in his skull as he walked down the passage waiting for the bullet. But we make the brain perfect before we blow it out. The command of the old depositions was, thou shalt not. The command of the totalitarians was, thou shalt. Our command is, thou art. No one whom we bring to this place ever stands out against us. Everyone is washed clean. Even those three miserable traitors in whose innocence you once believed, Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, in the end we broke them down. I took part in their interrogation myself. I saw them gradually worn down, whimpering, groveling, weeping, and in the end it was not with fear or fear, only with penitence. By the time we had finished with them, they were only the shells of men. There was nothing left in them except sorrow for what they had done and love of Big Brother. It was touching to see how they loved him. They begged to be shot quickly so that they could die while their minds were still clean. So that's why they do what they do. He says, that's crazy. So Winston doesn't understand, and I think we, for a large part, don't understand why the party wastes so much time trying to capture all of these people who are committing thought crime and making them confess things that aren't true, and letting them go back out into the world for a couple years before being shot. And here we find our answer, and the answer is that when these people die, they do not die as heretics, as people who are against the party. They die in complete submission of the party and with so much love for Big Brother. And O'Brien says that when the three men that the photograph was about, the Aronson, Jones, and Rutherford, when they died, they begged to be shot as quickly as possible because they wanted to die with their brains still clean. And in the eyes of the party, a clean brain is one that's so in love with Big Brother. And so they begged to be shot as fast as possible. His voice had grown almost dreamy. The exultation, the lunatic enthusiasm was still in his face. He is not pretending, thought Winston. He is not a hypocrite. He believes every word he says. What most oppressed him was the consciousness of his own intellectual inferiority. He watched the heavy yet graceful form strolling to and fro, in and out of the range of his vision. O'Brien was a being in all ways larger than himself. There was no idea that he had ever had or could have that O'Brien had not long ago known, examined, and rejected. His mind contained Winston's mind, but in that case, how could it be true that O'Brien was mad? It must be he, Winston, who was mad. O'Brien halted and looked down at him. His voice had grown stern again. Do not imagine that you will save yourself, Winston. However completely you surrender to us, no one who has once gone astray is ever spared, and even if we choose to let you live out the natural term of your life, still, you would never escape from us. What happens to you here is forever. Understand that in advance. We shall crush you down to the point from which there is no coming back. Things will happen to you from which you could never recover. If you lived 1,000 years, never again would you be capable of ordinary human feeling. Everything will be dead inside you. Never again will you be capable of love, of friendship, or joy of living, or laughter, or curiosity, or courage, or integrity. You will be hollow. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves. He paused and signaled to the man in the white coat. Winston was aware of some heavy piece of apparatus being pushed into place behind his head. O'Brien sat down beside the bed so that his face was almost at level with Winston. 3,000, he said, speaking over Winston's head to the man in the white coat. Two soft pads, which felt slightly moist, clamped themselves against Winston's temples. He quailed. There was pain coming, a new kind of pain. O'Brien laid a hand reassuringly, almost kindly, on his. This time it will not hurt, he said. Keep your eyes fixed on mine. At this moment there was a devastating explosion, or what seemed like an explosion, though it was not certain whether there was any noise. There was undoubtedly a blinding flash of light. Winston was not hurt, only prostrated. Although he had been lying on his back when the thing happened, he had a feeling that he had been knocked into that position. A terrific, painless blow had flattened him out. Also, something had happened inside his head. As his eyes regained their focus, he remembered who he was and where he was, and recognized the face that was gazing into his own. But somewhere or other there was a large patch of emptiness, as though a piece had been taken out of his brain. It will not last, said O'Brien. Look me in the eyes. What country is Oceania at war with? Winston thought. He knew what was meant by Oceania, and that he himself was a citizen of Oceania. He also remembered Eurasia and Eastasia, but who was at war with whom he did not know. In fact, he had not been aware that there was any war. I don't remember. Oceania is at war with Eastasia. Do you remember that now? Yes. Oceania has always been at war with Eastasia, since the beginning of your life, since the beginning of the party, since the beginning of history. The war has continued without a break. Always the same war. Do you remember that? Yes. 11 years ago, you created a legend about 3 men who had been condemned to death for treachery. You pretended that you had seen a piece of paper, which proved them innocent. No such piece of paper ever existed. You invented it, and later you grew to believe it. You remember now the very moment at which you invented it. Do you remember that? Yes. Just now, I held up the fingers of my hand to you. You saw 5 fingers. Do you remember that? Yes. O'Brien held up the fingers of his left hand with the thumb concealed. There are 5 fingers there. Do you see 5 fingers? Yes. And he did see them. For a fleeting instant before the scenery of his mind changed, he saw 5 fingers, and there was no deformity. Then everything was normal again, and the old fear, the hatred, and the bewilderment came crowding back. But there had been a moment, he did not know how long, 30 seconds perhaps, of luminous certainty, when each new suggestion of O'Brien's had filled up a patch of emptiness and become absolute truth, and when 2 and 2 could have been 3 as easily as 5, if that were what was needed, It had faded out before Brian had dropped his hand, but though he could not recapture it, he could remember it, as one remembers a vivid experience as some remote period of one's life when one is in effect a different person. And I'm going to stop there and we'll pick it up.